Now, interestingly, in the discussion we've just had, you said you were a Remainer, but it seems you've changed your colours a little bit as time has gone on.
Well, I think that Mark was saying in his piece on the same sector that it was an awful day or two. It was a real shock to us. But we're very adaptable in the UK. We're very innovative. There's massive innovation going on all around us in the UK, and I think we are seeing some of the opportunities now. As the Prime Minister said, Brexit means Brexit. It's going to happen, and we are determined to make a success of it.
Something that didn't come out in the discussion is the growth study that you've been working on. Perhaps you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, that was a major review undertaken by the government to look at the competitiveness of the UK maritime and marine industries. We reported in September 15, the interesting thing now is that the Minister has ordered a review, so we're actually quite deep looking at, how far have things changed. With Brexit, for example, since the report, how does that change things? It's a blueprint which has been adopted very much by the industry, but it's a living blueprint, if you like, so that, certain aspects I'm sure will change over time. But there is work on, and this afternoon I'll be in a meeting with ministers on just this. So we're working very hard on the competitiveness of the UK maritime offer. One interesting thing very quickly, the Parker report on warships, warship procurement, talked a little bit about this spreading over into marine, into commercial, I should say. And there is some work going on to that now. So I think we feel there is a potential to grow the commercial shipbuilding in this country now, which is quite exciting.
And just before I switch to our colleague to your right, I can't help but notice that you do sit in the House of Lords. What can we expect from the House of Lords in light of yesterday's Supreme Court decision?
It's a very good thing. I'm a hereditary, and I was lucky enough to be elected in July 15. I was Lord Mayor last year, so I was extremely busy, 100 days overseas and so on. I've only just really started sitting, so I don't consider myself an expert. I think there is an anticipation that their lordships will be scrutinising very, very carefully. That's their great function, I think that my own view is that their lordships will realise that this is what the electorate wanted, and it will go through. I think I'm quietly optimistic that it will all go through Parliament following the decision of the Supreme Court yesterday.
Now, Mark, you were asked in open discussion whether you were fearful there'll be a mass exodus, and you gave a very interesting answer.
Yes, and I think, if I remember rightly, my answer was that I wasn't fearful. In fact, I found the process quite invigorating, exhilarating even. Yes, there are problems ahead, but London and the UK as a whole are used to dealing with these sorts of problems. We have a long, long history of that. And in a way, I was thinking, as Lord Mountevans was talking there, the whole reaction to the referendum vote and the immediate aftermath almost gives an example of the way that the UK deals with things. A seismic vote, unheard of, certainly for at least a generation and possibly longer. And after a couple of days of navel gazing and shock, and a little bit longer of political uncertainty, it was back to work, within a week, both on the business side, but also on the political side. And, do we know much more now than we knew then about what will actually happen? Probably not on the detail. I think what is clear is that the very worst and the very best of what people thought might happen are unlikely to happen, and it will be somewhere in the middle, as so often in life. But I think what the immediate reaction within the country, and certainly within our political and business classes, showed was that we will, as a country, get on with it, and we will make the best of it, as we always have.
Now, Mark, you've alluded, if I may, Lord Mayor, Mark, you've alluded to difficulties, and I will bring you into this in a moment, if I may. Let's get into a little bit of the detail. What do you perceive to be the key sticking points, the key challenges? And on that point of mass exodus, of course, we do have some key banks indicating that they're going to relocate some services overseas.
Yes, well, as a lawyer, my whole training is to look forward and identify problems. It's and often a criticism of lawyers that all we do is spot problems, but actually we're pretty good at solving them. And I think most lawyers in their career realise that there is a solution to most obstacles that come our way. And it's just a case of identifying them and working out a solution. And that's really the task for us as a nation, and also for our friends in the EU. So if you're looking at specific issues, on the legal side, things like enforceability of judgments, is a big one for my profession. Passporting for financial services clearly is another important one. At the moment, all we can do is spot the problems. There are many ways that those could be solved, some better and some worse for the UK and the EU. I think, though, unfortunately at this stage you can only retreat to broad generalisations and broad observations, and I retreat to the broad observation that I think the biggest winner, if the UK and our friends in the EU who remain in the EU, the biggest winners if we really fall out and it becomes a war of attrition, will not be either the UK or the EU. It will be people in New York, it will be people in Singapore, and it will be people in China and elsewhere. So really it is in all of our best interests here in Europe to work out a plan that works for us all. But we're used to doing that. Both inside and outside the EU, we've got a long history of working with our friends in Europe, and I'm confident that we will continue to do so.
I think a lot of us are very European. I speak French, I speak Scandinavian languages. I consider myself quite a European person, and I think that the security argument, the fact that we're neighbours, cultural identity, clearly we'll want to preserve as much of that as we can realistically, and to maintain our business position there. I think that we are something I would add to what Mike was saying earlier on about Britain adjusting to all this, very strong innovation going on in the UK. We're very adaptable. We've had all sorts of things going back to the Great Fire and things like that, which caused all sorts of challenges here. We've always tended to come back stronger. So there's that. I think in terms of specific industries, I don't know whether you do insurance work, but obviously that we know, yes, banking you mentioned, also insurance, some insurance businesses, many of them of course already have European activities, but some of them, for example Lloyd's, will be opening an office somewhere in Europe, they have announced, and that's, we'll have to cope with that.
Final two-part question for both of you, and if I come to Lord Mountevans first. We're here at Marine Money. Will that other marine capital centre, New York, be rubbing its hands in with glee at what's going on? That's part one of two. And part two of two is, 5 years down the line, will London still be the preeminent maritime centre for business in the world?
Well, I'm not sure that they're rubbing their hands, because everybody's got things that they're trying to scratch their head and think about at the moment. I think really interesting in America on the maritime side that Trump with his support for native businesses, shipbuilding for the Navy and so on. That's an interesting maritime thing. He's also got people in the administration like Wilbur Ross, like Tillerson from ExxonMobil and so on. He's got people in the administration now with shipping connections, and all of these great societies, we face a challenge of keeping maritime in the front of people's attention. So I think that's positive. I'm sure that they'll be hoping to gain from what's happening. But there's such a focus here from government and from all of us on competitiveness and adapting that I'm optimistic that London will retain its position. To be quite honest, I'm hoping that I see London growing. I see the whole cake growing around the world, but I see London growing.
One supplementary question. I will give you your chance, Mark, I promise. You mentioned...
I'd love to say, because it's a small country, we tend to talk about London, it's actually a national offer. I always say London and the UK's maritime offer.
Thank you. You mentioned Wilbur Ross, who does have the shipping connections, but of course he famously recently made a speech in Cyprus where he essentially said to the EU, this is your opportunity to asset strip the UK.
Sure, absolutely. Well, he's entitled to say these things at conferences. I don't personally know him, some of my colleagues do, but why not? He can say that. We'll be on the front foot to avoid those situations.
And Mark, the same two-part question for yourself.
Well, as you might imagine, not too much to add to that. I suspect that people in New York won't be rubbing their hands. That's not their style. They'll definitely be looking at opportunities, but I don't think they'll be wasting their time gloating. And it remains to be seen whether they should have been rubbing their hands or not. But I tend to agree with Lord Mountevans that if we get this right with our friends in the EU, then the cake will grow bigger and potentially everyone can gain. But there's no reason necessarily why anyone in New York should be seeing this as good news. Yes, there are opportunities, but in times of uncertainty, there's always opportunity for people, and there's lots of opportunity in London. And I've forgotten your second question.
Whether Maritime London will be the preeminent maritime centre. I said 5 years.
I think so, or at least it won't have lost any ground from where it is today. I think the focus on what we do and how we do it and who we do it with can only be healthy for the UK as a whole, and certainly for London. Yes, we will have to adapt, we'll have to do things differently and perhaps do some things with different people, but that's life, and we've done it before, and I see no reason why we should change our approach now.